Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, one story in Pakistan reported two different ways.
Was he a CIA contractor? Was he a diplomat?
The CIA agent and the media.
The protesters continue to chant.
Nigerian journalism gets a shakeup all the way from New York. China clamping down on the news media to keep the Jasmine Revolution from spreading to the Far East. And taking stock of the footage they call B-roll in our web video of the week.
Do you need shots of ordinary people doing things for your next commercial? We got that B-roll.
We got that B-roll.
A pretty big news story has been unfolding in Pakistan over the past few weeks. Don't feel bad if you've missed it. Much of the news media did too. Some of the outlets that did report the story got it wrong and may have done so deliberately. On January 27th, an American named Raymond Davis allegedly shot and killed two Pakistani men in Lahore who he claimed were trying to rob him. The Pakistani media first speculated and then reported that Davis was with the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. He was a CIA spy. The U.S. Embassy said that Davis was a mere technical advisor, and the State Department in Washington urged the U.S. media to go with that version of the story, which they did, until a British newspaper, The Guardian, reported that Davis was in fact CIA. Our starting point this week is Lahore, Pakistan. The case of the unquiet American, the disquieting effect that this incident has had on U.S.-Pakistani relations, and the noise that now surrounds the coverage and non-coverage of the story.
Pakistan. Tonight, an American man is in prison there accused of murder.
When the story first broke, it was a broad daylight affair.
It's just had blanket coverage in the Pakistani media. For the past month, the headlines have been entirely dominated by the Davis issue.
Investigations are underway and more facts about the shooting incident are being uncovered.
The situation always seemed a bit murky.
What had been painfully obvious, that Raymond Davis worked for the CIA, has now been reported.
Actually, the CIA connection was not obvious, not in the American media, because they did not report it until February 21st, 25 days after the killings and weeks after the Pakistani media were saying the shooter worked for American intelligence.
If you tune in to Pakistani television stations, day in and day out, they're talking about this incident, they're talking about the relationship with the United States, the fact that CIA spies are able to work with impunity throughout the country.
In the Pakistani media, it had been out there for several weeks that Davis was a CIA agent. News organizations were covering protests where you had Pakistanis in the streets who basically were holding up signs saying that this guy was a CIA agent.
It's been a sort of, media firestorm, really. We've had actual interrogation tapes from Davis with the police or in prison being released to the media and aired, and really this is, I think, pretty unprecedented stuff.
Initially, the Pakistani media's coverage ranged from the resourceful to the speculative to the bizarre. Reports that Davis was recruiting for the Pakistani Taliban, even supplying Al-Qaeda with nuclear material.
The Pakistan media, in my view, has really been irresponsible in covering this. It's really infotainment. They bring on provocative guests who make a number of spurious arguments that are very much targeted to inflame and to arouse sentiments. You could say the CIA had a weather machine that made it snow in Lahore, and there's going to be someone that's going to buy that story.
But for all their editorial excesses, at least the Pakistani media were reporting the story with the CIA angle, which raised once again the problematic relationship that exists between Washington, Islamabad, and two intelligence communities that do not trust each other.
The media is playing a leading role in putting pressure on the government. Had the media not discovered this case, the government possibly would have made some sort of a compromise with the Americans, let Raymond Davis go. But the media itself is now putting everything back on the front. It wants the government to be on a back foot. It wants the government to answer.
For the first 3.5 weeks, U.S. media outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Associated Press news agency, were all reporting the shooter was a diplomat. They later admitted they did that at the request of the U.S. State Department, which said revealing Davis's CIA affiliation might put him at greater risk. The State Department asked the same of the British newspaper The Guardian, but given what was already public knowledge in Pakistan, The Guardian did not cooperate.
There were several emails backwards and forwards where the CIA presented their arguments, but in the end, our assessment really was that the safety threat to Davis was not linked to publication of any story. They were already burning his effigy in the streets, calling him a CIA agent. So really, it actually wasn't such a great secret at that point. There was also a sense that perhaps the CIA was using this safety argument as an excuse to have him released as a diplomat.
Once The Guardian published, U.S. media outlets stopped censoring themselves, reported that Davis was CIA, and explained to their readers why they had held that information back. The New York Times published some readers' letters critical of the decision. One said, yet again, the Times has shown itself to be a willing pawn of the government's propaganda ministry. The paper defended the decision through its public editor, who wrote the Times did the only thing it could do. But even he asked, how can a news outlet stay credible when readers learn later that it has concealed what it knows?
The New York Times fell in a real trap here. It's one thing if the New York Times learns about something happening abroad, say if somebody is kidnapped in a war zone, and they simply don't report on it at all. But what the New York Times did is they tried to continue covering the story and publishing the statements from the US government saying he was only a diplomat, and ignoring or not giving much credence to reports in the Pakistani press that he was a CIA agent. So when you look back at these stories, they are misleading.
It was certainly gratuitous. It didn't fool anyone, but it also meant that any claim that the US government would then make from that point onward dubious, because they were in fact trying to use the media to conceal information about Mr. Davis. It simply doesn't work as a strategy.
Some media critics have saluted The Guardian for breaking the news embargo and provoking U.S. newspapers to follow. But would The Guardian have acted with the same independence had Davis been British, working for MI6 as opposed to the CIA?
When a government approaches a newspaper not to publish a story, there are two arguments it can make that are very powerful. One is that an individual's life is in danger. The other is that national security can be threatened. So it's very difficult to hypothetically say what would happen if a British intelligence agent was involved. But there's certainly no doubt that The Guardian would take those concerns very seriously and look at them on their merit.
U.S. officials fear Davis.
Because what news organizations in one country call a national security concern, the rest of the world's media just call news. And the moment Raymond Davis pulled the trigger in Lahore, he became a story, whether the CIA likes it or not. Our Global Village Voice is now on the reporting of the Raymond Davis story.
I think the concealment of this information by the New York Times and the Washington Post demonstrates that these U.S. media outlets place the interests of the United States government over the interests of the public and their right to know what their government is doing. I believe that anytime journalism begins to serve a state power, whatever power that may be, that it ceases to be journalism and has begun to move into the realm of propaganda.
You will not find any report in US print or electronic media which will portray Pakistan's point of view. Please don't forget the common people in Pakistan's busy marketplaces nabbed Raymond Davis and handed him over to policing and judicial authorities. Well, this clears, at least in our point of view, that his life is not a threat from people or government of Pakistan.
Davis is a murder suspect and has entered the judicial process of Pakistan. His CIA status is very material to that case, and withholding it would show contempt for the process.
If you've got an opinion on the news media that you'd like to get on the air as one of our Global Village Voices, we suggest you join the thousands of our viewers who already follow us on Facebook and Twitter. They go to those sites to find out what stories we're working on so they can weigh in. Or you can just get in touch with us via email. We're at listeningpost@aljazeera.net. Time now for Listening Post News Bites. The American soldier accused of leaking hundreds of thousands of documents to WikiLeaks has been charged with another 22 offenses, the most serious of which carries a possible death penalty. Among the new charges against Bradley Manning, who's being held in a military prison in Virginia, aiding the enemy. He's also accused of wrongfully causing intelligence to be published on the internet, multiple counts of theft of public records, and computer fraud. The aiding the enemy charge is the one that can be punishable by death, although the prosecution says it will not seek the death penalty. In the Manning case, that option would be open to the judge. As for WikiLeaks' own legal problems, a judge in the UK has ruled that the organization's frontman, Julian Assange, should be extradited to Sweden to face sexual assault accusations there. Assange's lawyers are appealing that ruling, saying that if Assange is extradited to Sweden, he could then be passed on to the US and face similar charges to Private Manning. The authorities in China do not want the protests that have swept through North Africa to take root in their country, and they're keying on the media to make sure that that doesn't happen. Demonstrations planned in 23 cities on the mainland and in Taiwan to kick off China's own Jasmine Revolution have been marked by sparse turnouts and instant clampdowns on journalists. Foreign reporters claim they were harassed, some said they were beaten, and a BBC News crew said it was bundled into a police van and forcibly removed from a demo. Local media were also targeted and probably face more serious consequences. As many as 100 Chinese bloggers and web activists were detained or preemptively put under house arrest prior to the protests. One of them, Ran Yunfei, a magazine writer and signatory of Charter 08, a manifesto that calls for political reform in the country, has reportedly been charged with subversion of state power for distributing information about the protests online. Journalists in Iraq are still paying the price for trying to report the news. They're calling February 25th a black day for media freedom in the country. A series of protests that Iraqis described as a day of rage descended into violence with 29 reported fatalities. There was also a catalog of attacks on journalists. Police raided a TV station, Al Diyar, which was filming the Baghdad demo from its own roof. 10 people were arrested there. A journalist was reportedly run over by a police car, and Muntazar al-Zaidi, the reporter famous for throwing his shoes at former U.S. President George Bush, was reportedly arrested as well. Media workers in Iraq have long accused Prime Minister al-Maliki of tolerating a climate of intimidation against journalists. They've announced that in response they will refuse to cover al-Maliki, but it's hard to foresee them sticking to their guns on that. He is the Prime Minister, after all. 8 newspapers in the West African country of Ivory Coast have ceased publication because of what they call constant harassment from supporters of the disputed president. All of the newspapers involved are seen as pro-Alassane Ouattara papers. He was widely considered to have won the presidential elections in November last year. Ouattara says he beat the incumbent, Laurent Gbagbo, who refuses to relinquish power. In a joint statement, the owners of the papers denounced the, quote, imperious and serious threat that hangs over the private and independent press, which refuses to go along with the illegal acts of Laurent Gbagbo's government, unquote. The papers, which say they will remain closed until further notice, also slammed what they call persistent judicial and police harassment of their staff. They're saying that their journalists are in constant danger and face threats of all different kinds. The Ivorian media have been described as partisan and outspoken during the recent unrest, and many analysts fear that their coverage could drive the country into another civil war. In just over a month, Nigerians will go to the polls to elect a new president. The country's media have been trying to cover the campaign, but it's not easy. Last year, out of the 175 countries that the media watchdog group Reporters Without Borders listed in its Press Freedom Index, Nigeria was ranked number 145. That's down 10 places from the year before. One website that's managing to report and make news in Nigeria is called Sahara Reporters, which made its online debut in 2006. It's become a media force in Nigeria, largely because it's not in Nigeria. The site's editor, Omoyele Sowore, is based in New York City, beyond the reach of the politicians and the corporations that his site often reports on. And most of his contributors aren't trained journalists. They're everyday Nigerians who photograph, video, and blog for Sahara Reporters. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on a website that isn't everyone's journalistic cup of tea, but is shaking up the Nigerian news space nonetheless.
From his office in Manhattan, New York, Omoyele Sowore, the editor of Sahara Reporters, is whipping up a media froth 8,000 kilometers away in Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, Sahara Reporters is a very popular media outlet here in Nigeria, and I guess what appeals to people is the nature of the stories they report.
Eyewitness accounts, just raw information about sensitive issues that the press in Nigeria is too afraid to publish or report.
Stories like the huge ExxonMobil oil spill in the Niger Delta last year, touchy tribal politics in Nigeria's various states. But the story that put Sahara Reporters on the news map in Nigeria had to do with the president, Umar Musa Yar'Adua.
Thousands of protesters took to the streets of the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, to condemn the absence of Mr. President.
Late in 2009, the president was sick and out of the country. The government kept the details under wraps, and reporting by Nigerian media was thin on facts.
Most senators expressed their anger over the lack of credible information on the health status of the #1 citizen.
Sahara Reporters got the story, reporting where the president was, what the health issue was, and kept a running count of his days out of the country. It's the kind of journalism Nigerian media do not typically provide.
Most of what Nigerians get their news from, I mean the newspapers, the TV stations, have been completely taken over by the money bags. So that has diluted the media as we know it.
It's a media market that is dominated by politicians and influential businessmen, and it limits investigative reporting, and it leads to sometimes unethical journalism or unethical practices. But this is not unique to Nigeria. It happens all across Africa.
Can we get an email, or you can send me a text,
Which is why Showore's decision to base himself out of New York is a smart one. Last year alone, Reporters Without Borders recorded 40 incidents of press violations in Nigeria. 3 journalists were killed, 7 were kidnapped in South Nigeria, and others faced death threats. An office in Manhattan puts Showore at a safe distance.
Sahara Reporters, run from New York, allows this website to be free and independent of persecution and harassment. In the past, we have documented cases where Nigerian security have arrested individuals that were suspected of being affiliated with his websites. This is a website that is a target, a prime target for the Nigerian government.
Because Sahara Reporters has been based on the web and overseas, there hasn't been that fear of reporting what they believe to be true. And I think that that's what Nigerians have really respected and embraced about Sahara Reporters, and that's why it continues to grow in popularity.
Sahara Reporters, mostly I browse it on the net, and I find it very interesting. They give quality information.
The Sahara Reporters have really gone a long way to expose some of the ills of society that have been kept under the carpet by the Nigerian mainstream media.
The website's popularity isn't just with Nigerian readers. A lot of the traffic to the site comes from people wanting to contribute. Showore employs no formal staff. His website's tagline is "Report yourself," and he means it.
There are people who are saying to themselves, we used to consume news, but we can actually produce news ourselves. We are doing the part of media or news reporting that is too important to be left to journalists or professionals.
It really has changed the face of online journalism with respect to the Nigerian audience. Nigerians love information. They are news junkies, at least most of them are. And Sahara Reporters has given them a forum where they can express themselves.
But while crowdsourced reporting can be powerful, and as Tunisia and Egypt proved, revolutionary, it also has drawbacks.
One of the major challenges that citizen journalism faces is accuracy of information, because when you're getting thousands of reports, eyewitness accounts, it is difficult to sometimes determine whether or not these reports are accurate or not.
Well, Sahara Reporters has been controversial in some respects, and Al Jazeera have been a target of Sahara Reporters journalism.
The president was plagued by serious bouts of illness.
Last year, when the former president died, it was reported that the First Lady of Nigeria had approached Al Jazeera about getting her brother-in-law onto one of our reports. And I read in their reports, my name was mentioned several times about approaches towards me by members of the family. Now, that never happened. The Sahara Reporters packaged the whole thing as if the first family had essentially paid for airtime, which was completely unfounded and untrue.
Sahara Reporters may get caught out once or twice, but that isn't denting the website's following.
Sahara Reporters and Mr. Sowore are part of a larger community of citizen journalists and online-based bloggers and reporters who are more and more gaining prominence by breaking some of the biggest stories in Africa. It is a wonderful phenomenon which has allowed so many other voices to join the debate.
But the truth is that with social media, everybody actually controls their own media space now. You have a Twitter account, you transmit your own news on it. You have Facebook, you have friends. What is important is for people to get the message as small as possible in a big way. And that's why we're hit, with Nigerians.
With elections coming April 9th, voters will be logging on to Sahara Reporters in big numbers. There are thousands of stories to be told and millions of voices to be heard on the site that delivers news on Nigeria via New York.
More Global Village voices now on the media landscape in Nigeria.
Sahara Reporters are a credible organization that's come to the forefront of media in Nigeria and across Africa over the last many years. The reasons for this stem from the fact that there has been a lack of balance in the Nigerian media scene.
I'm an ardent reader of Sahara Reporters, but I must point out that web media in general is unfortunately not yet an integral part of Nigerian society. There is plenty of room for innovation as our society embraces the internet further. However, abject poverty and a rather high illiteracy index have been major setbacks to our interaction with the internet in general.
A lot of Nigerians are, trooping online to get first-hand information of what's going on in their country. So Sahara Reporters, Nigerian Village Squares, and lots of bloggers around the world are contributing immensely to information dissemination in Nigeria. And I think the future of Nigeria will depend a lot on how people use and consume information from the net.
Finally, there's a term used in the North American news business. It's called B-roll. It often refers to the stock footage that is used and then reused as visual wallpaper in television news reports. Now, B-roll can be scenic shots for tourism stories. It can be retail shots for stories about the economy, or crowded sidewalks to illustrate pieces on public opinion. Many TV outlets have their own B-roll library, but sometimes they will buy the footage from outside production companies. Here's a spoof sales pitch, our web video of the week, from a fake production company that's peddling some raw material that has a familiar look to it. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
Do you need shots of ordinary people doing things for your next commercial? We got that B-roll. We got that B-roll. Two men pointing at an office file? We got that B-roll. Bored man flipping through channels? We got that B-roll. Angry man in traffic? Yeah, we got that B-roll. What do you want him to wear? Casual? Upscale casual? Business? We got that B-roll. Why does he look so upset? Maybe he's late for work. Nope, he's at work. He's a B-roll actor. Think that's all the B-roll we got? Not even close. Overwhelmed man trying to pay bills? Yeah, we got it. Frustrated man looking for a job in the paper. You know we got it. And lunch meeting success. Hey, look, that's me. I like my B-roll so much I'm in it. Kirk Gibson hitting a game-winning home run in the '88 World Series. No! That's too specific. That is not B-roll. Doctor talking to smiling patient. We got that B-roll. Man having trouble sleeping. Got it. What's his problem? He doesn't like being in B-roll? I was just in some B-roll and I loved it. The sneezer, backache, headache, and depressed woman touching a wall. Why is she touching the wall? I don't know. That's what depressed people do, right? Don't judge the B-roll. Listen, we got all that B-roll and thousands more.
We got that B-roll.
You know we do.
To order your B-roll, call 1-800-BBB-ROLL. That's 1-800-BBB-ROLL. Call now.